views with a major legal challenge, one that could reshape South Africa's education landscape. The Pestalozzi Trust, a legal defense fund for home and community-based education, has filed a constitutional court application that is essentially challenging the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill. We all know it as the BELA Act. And their argument, well, the fact that Parliament has failed in its constitutional duty to ensure proper public participation, and that the process in itself was rushed, it was flawed, and ultimately left out the voices of key stakeholders, especially those in home and alternative education spaces. So it's a rather bold move, and I think one that raises very, very important questions about how laws are made in this country and who they actually serve. And joining me now is Christopher Cordeiro, is a spokesperson for the Pestalozzi Trust. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving us your time. And I think we can start this conversation with what's at the heart of the matter, your application that argues that the BELA Act was procedurally flawed. And in plain terms, for our listeners, what does that mean? What does Pestalozzi say about Parliament and what they ultimately got wrong when it comes to the BELA Act and its enforcement?
Good morning, Silalo, and also to your audience. Thank you for having us on. Yes, I think you've got right to the heart of it. There are essentially four kind of grounds on which the trust is challenging the act. One is that there was undue haste in processing the act, and that there was procedural irregularities in Parliament itself. Second, that there's an absence of a detailed socioeconomic impact assessment. And if people don't know what the social and economic impact of any action by government is going to be, it's a challenge for them. It's impossible for them to actually make meaningful input into an act. Also, that to the extent that the public did actually make a number of inputs, and the extent to which they made those inputs were either misrepresented or not fully represented, and in some cases not represented at all to Parliament, both to the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education and the Select Committee in the National Council of Provinces. But at the heart of the challenge is the fact that there was as you mentioned, a lack of meaningful public participation. Meaningful public participation, and there was a case in 2023, the Mohale case, which struck down the traditional Khoisan Leaders Act, has a number of key components. One is that people need to be notified in time about public hearings. The second one is that people need to be educated about the bill. Many people during the bill process came in with very little knowledge of the bill, complained about that. Then thirdly, people need to be educated about the bill. People need to then be given adequate time. In a number of cases, there was people were lectured to about the bill rather than given an opportunity to express their opinions. And then there must be, and so those essentially are three of the key things. I mean, people need, when they go into those hearings, to have access to the bill. So those are the kind of challenges that were faced in the process, and that's why the trust is challenging it.
How do you respond to critics that might ask if whether or not this is really about participation or it's about Pestalozzi fundamentally disagreeing with the idea of regulating homeschooling under a national framework?
Well, yeah. You're quite right. This is a procedural challenge. So to those critics, I say you're correct. This is in a certain extent, this is a procedural challenge. The courts always want to know if a law has been passed properly before they look at the content of the law. And the trust is actually, but the trust is fundamentally opposed to regulation of home education under a Schools Act. That's something that's been made clear for a very long time, and certainly since 2017. When the trust and 1,000 homeschoolers, and homeschoolers are a very small percentage of the population, about 0.5% of the schooling population, but there were about 20% of the people who made comment on the bill back in 2017 to the DBE. And at that stage, homeschoolers said, look, homeschooling needs to be regulated under a completely um, different kind of legislation than a schools act, and we're seeing the practical impacts of that now with the bill being rolled out and a whole number of implementation problems.
Mm, no, definitely. As I was going through your press release, you also mentioned that the Schools Act is not fit for purpose. When it comes to home education, which is I think where you guys are most interested in, what would an appropriate alternative look like? Are you advocating for an entirely separate education law to govern homeschooling?
Yeah, so we need. I mean, ultimately, what the trust is trying to achieve, but this is not necessarily in the context of this case, because this case, as I
Mm,
said, is procedural. But ultimately, the trust is looking ultimately that home um, that there be separate, uh, an appropriate regulation for home education, that takes into account but that needs to be based on research, and it needs to be based on deep consultation with the home education community, the homeschooling community. Um, because to be honest, the fact is that the department may be good or may not be good people to have various views about running schools, but they know very little about homeschooling and home education. So whatever happens needs to be a consequence of this broad consultation with the homeschooling community, and those are two important things. So certainly we believe as the trust that there should be separate regulation, that it's inappropriate to regulate homeschooling under the same law as a 1,500 person school. I think that's fairly obvious to everyone. But we can't speak for the whole community. There needs to be full community involvement at the very upstream, at the beginning of the process, and that's the best way to then get an act that's broadly acceptable.
mm, mm. And I think I want to continue touching on that point. You guys have also raised, I think, concerns when it comes to quote unquote independent micro schools and also online education. Are you seeing a growing demand in some of these areas? And is the Department of Education keeping pace with the reality on the ground?
And the answer to that is yes and no. So yes, there is a growing demand. One of the reasons that we're concerned about that is because it touches very closely on homeschooling. And unfortunately, the Department of Basic Education is not keeping up with these trends. There was, in fact, the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, in fact, said that they should include online education in the bill. That never happened. So yes, those areas also need appropriate regulation, um, and perhaps some in the Schools Act, perhaps some not. But perhaps some in an Alternative Education Act. That's something that has to be discussed and debated.
And finally, if this constitutional court challenge is successful, what outcomes are you hoping for? Is the goal to completely scrap the BELA Act entirely, or to force Parliament to go back and simply do it the right way?
Well, as I said, this is a procedural challenge. So what the procedural, so what the so and I should say that the Concord has very wide powers to rule appropriately in
Hmm.
general. And they also have, and when you deal with children, it's important to remember that the best interests of the child are paramount in all matters that affect the child from the Constitution. So they have an even broader latitude. They have more latitude even there. But essentially, what we're asking for is for the bill to go back to Parliament. And we actually
Hmm.
asked the President this on the 17th of May after the bill was passed to do this already. And that Parliament must reconduct the public engagement process and its other processes, and do those appropriately, fairly, and constitutionally.
No, definitely. Christopher Cordeiro, Pestalozzi, spokesperson. Thank you so much for giving us the time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Have a great day, and a great day to your listeners.
There you go. What are your thoughts on the BELA Act? The government has putting it into full swing. There's still a lot that has been discussed around it. Are they kind of some of its recommendations or suggestions that you're seeing in education institutions, homeschooling? Have you seen a change since it was signed into law by the president sometime last year? And do you agree with Pestalozzi, the fact that government essentially broke the constitution? They didn't go about enforcing or putting into place the BELA Act the correct way? And lastly, are there any amendments that you'd like to see in the BELA Act, or do you completely just agree with it? Do you think there should be an overhaul when it comes to our, the way schooling is regulated in South Africa? You can engage with us. Our WhatsApp line is 061 or you can call us on 011 We're going to take a quick break. We'll be with you after this.